Welcome to Nation Scope, where the past decides the future, and today's story is one of audacity, greed, and a gamble so reckless it reshaped the world. How did a tiny island thousands of miles away take control of the richest civilization on Earth? Not with an army at first, but with ink, ships, and nerve. This is not legend. This is history. And it begins with a gamble that should have failed. At the dawn of the 17th century, India was not a land waiting to be conquered. It was a civilization at its peak. Its cities hummed with trade, its fields fed millions, and its treasuries overflowed with silver and gold drawn from every corner of Asia. By some modern estimates, India produced nearly a quarter of the world's entire economy. Cotton from Bengal clothed continents. Spices from the Malabar coast flavored Europe's elite kitchens. Diamonds from Golconda glittered in royal crowns. To the rest of the world, India was not just wealthy, it was indispensable. Britain, by contrast, was small, damp, and desperately late to the game. While Spain looted the Americas and Portugal carved sea routes to Asia, England stood on the margins of empire. Its navy was improving, yes, but it lacked the vast resources of its rivals. English merchants looked east with envy and frustration. They knew the future lay in Asian trade, but the Portuguese guarded the Indian Ocean like a private lake, and the Dutch were ruthless competitors. For England, breaking into this world was not just risky, it bordered on suicidal. Yet in 1600, a group of London merchants made a decision that would quietly change history. They formed a private company, not an army, not a government. It was called the Governor and Company of Merchants of London, trading into the East Indies, soon shortened to the East India Company. Their ambition was modest on paper: trade spices, silks, and textiles. Their resources were laughably small. A handful of ships. Limited capital. No territorial claims. No standing army. No royal mandate to conquer. What they did have was something far more dangerous: permission to gamble. The English crown granted the company a charter giving it monopoly rights over trade east of Africa. That single document transformed a group of merchants into a corporate weapon. The company could negotiate treaties, build forts, coin money, and wage war in the name of profit. It was capitalism armed with cannon fire. Still, India itself was not a target for conquest. Yet. At this time, the subcontinent was dominated by the Mughal Empire, one of the most powerful states on earth. Mughal emperors ruled over vast territories with sophisticated administration, enormous armies, and staggering wealth. Their courts dazzled foreign visitors. Their bureaucracy collected taxes with ruthless efficiency. Compared to the Mughal machine, the East India Company was a mosquito buzzing near a giant's ear. The English knew this, which is why they did not arrive as conquerors. They arrived as beggars. Company envoys presented themselves humbly before Mughal officials, offering gifts and flattering words. They asked only for permission to trade, to build small factories, trading posts, along the coast. To the Mughal elite, these foreigners were insignificant. Useful perhaps, but harmless. The empire was vast. What threat could a few pale merchants pose? So permissions were granted. In Surat. In Madras. In Calcutta. Each factory was a seed. Each warehouse a foothold. Each signed agreement, a thread tightening around India's future. The company learned quickly. They studied Indian politics, court rivalries, and local power struggles. They paid bribes. They hired translators. They adapted to Indian customs when it suited them, and ignored them when it didn't. Most importantly, they realized something critical. India was not a single unified political entity. Beneath the grandeur of empire lay fractures. Regional governors, rival princes, succession crises, and simmering resentment. The East India Company did not need to defeat India. It only needed to outlast it. As the 17th century wore on, the Mughal Empire began to strain under its own weight. Endless wars, extravagant courts, and weak successors chipped away at central authority. Provincial rulers grew more independent. Armies became loyal to generals rather than emperors. The once unbreakable system began to crack. The company watched patiently. By the early 1700s, something extraordinary had happened. The East India Company was no longer just trading goods, it was trading influence. Its ships carried soldiers alongside silk. Its accountants financed private armies. Its officials began deciding which Indian rulers would receive support, loans, or weapons. This was the moment the gamble escalated. What began as commerce was mutating into control. A private corporation, driven by profit and protected by distance, was inching towards sovereignty over millions of people. Not through open conquest, but through alliances, debt, and manipulation. Britain itself barely understood what it had unleashed. Because the real conquest of India would not begin with a declaration of war, but with a single battle sparked by betrayal, ambition, and a miscalculation that would hand a company the keys to an empire. And that battle was yet to come. By the middle of the 18th century, the Mughal Empire still existed in name, but its spine was fractured. The emperor in Delhi ruled more by tradition than power, while real authority slipped into the hands of regional governors, nawabs, and military strongmen. Bengal, the richest province of them all, was one such prize. Its rivers fed fertile land, its looms produced the finest textiles on earth, and its treasury was legendary. Whoever controlled Bengal controlled the economic heartbeat of India. This is where the East India Company made its boldest move yet. Bengal was ruled by Siraj-ud-Daulah, a young Nawab who inherited power amid suspicion, court intrigue, and enemies waiting for weakness. He was fiery, proud, and deeply distrustful of foreign interference. To him, the European trading companies were guests who had forgotten their place. The English, especially, had begun to behave less like merchants and more like rulers, fortifying Calcutta, stockpiling weapons, and sheltering his political enemies. Siraj-ud-Daulah decided to act. In 1756, his forces marched on Calcutta and swiftly overwhelmed the company's defenses. The British garrison collapsed. The city fell. Company officials fled or were captured. For a brief moment, the illusion shattered. The East India Company looked exactly like what it was, a fragile foreign presence at the mercy of Indian power. But the company did not accept defeat. Instead, it gambled everything. From Madras, a young and ambitious officer named Robert Clive was dispatched with a small force to reclaim Calcutta. Clive was not a nobleman. He was not a general trained in Europe's grand academies. He was a company man, hardened by India, driven by ambition, and unburdened by moral hesitation. He understood something crucial: the company could not defeat Bengal head-on, but it could divide it. Clive and company officials began secret negotiations with Siraj-ud-Daulah's own court. Discontented generals, betrayed nobles, men who wanted power more than loyalty. Chief among them was Mir Jafar, a senior commander in the Nawab's army, bitter over being sidelined and eager for the throne. The deal was simple and devastating. If Mir Jafar betrayed Siraj-ud-Daulah during battle, the company would make him Nawab of Bengal. In return, the company would receive staggering payments of silver and gold, trading privileges beyond imagination, and political influence that no foreign power had ever held before. It was treason disguised as diplomacy. On June 23, 1757, two armies met near the village of Plassey. On paper, it should not have been a contest. Siraj-ud-Daulah commanded tens of thousands of soldiers, cavalry, artillery, and war elephants. Clive had barely 3,000 men, many of them Indian sepoys trained by the company. Yet numbers meant nothing that day. As the battle began, Mir Jafar's troops stood still. Cannon fire echoed, rain soaked the field, and confusion spread through the Nawab's ranks. Siraj waited for his generals to advance. They did not. Betrayal paralyzed his army from within. By the time Siraj realized the truth, it was too late. The Battle of Plassey lasted only a few hours. It ended with a stunning result. A private trading company had defeated the ruler of Bengal, not through superior force, but through calculated betrayal. Siraj-ud-Daulah fled and was later captured and executed. Mir Jafar was installed as Nawab, a king in title, but a servant in reality. The company had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Bengal's treasury was open to them. Vast sums were transferred to company officials and shareholders back in Britain. Fortunes were made overnight. Clive himself returned to England fabulously wealthy, hailed as a hero. Parliament barely questioned how a corporation had come to control one of the richest regions on earth. But beneath the celebrations lay a dangerous truth. The East India Company was no longer just trading in India. It was ruling it. Mir Jafar soon discovered that power without independence was a curse. The company demanded constant payments, loans, and concessions. When he could not meet their demands, they replaced him, first with his son-in-law, then again with another puppet. Nawabs came and went, but company control only tightened. Revenue collection, once managed by Indian administrators, began shifting into British hands. The company learned how to extract wealth systematically, funneling it to Britain while draining Bengal's economy. Traditional industries collapsed under unfair trade rules. Farmers were forced to grow cash crops instead of food. Taxes rose relentlessly. And then came the famine. In 1770, Bengal was struck by one of the deadliest famines in human history. Millions died. Villages emptied. Fields turned to dust. The The company continued collecting taxes even as people starved. Profit did not pause for suffering. Plassey had not just changed Bengal. It had proven a terrifying concept. A corporation could conquer, rule, and exploit entire populations with the backing of a distant crown. Other Indian states took notice, some with fear, others with misplaced confidence that they could outmaneuver the company. They were wrong. Because Plassey was not the end of the gamble. It was only the opening win. And the company, intoxicated by success, was about to double down, dragging Britain itself into a conquest it could no longer control. Victory at Plassey transformed the East India Company in ways even its own directors had not fully imagined. What had once been a commercial enterprise now possessed something far more dangerous than warehouses and ships: political power backed by armed force. Bengal was not merely a source of profit, it was proof of concept. If one Indian kingdom could be bent, others could follow. The company's leaders began to see India not as a marketplace, but as a system to be controlled. Yet this sudden power brought a problem the company was not prepared for. Ruling was harder than conquering. Bengal was vast, complex, and densely populated. It relied on intricate systems of land revenue, local governance, and social obligations that had evolved over centuries. The company had no experience managing millions of people. Its officials were trained to buy cheap and sell dear, not to govern. And so, instead of reforming the system, they hollowed it out. In 1765, the Mughal emperor, now little more than a ceremonial figure, granted the East India Company the Diwani, the right to collect land revenue in Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. On paper, this was a legal arrangement. In reality, it marked the moment the company became the true ruler of eastern India. Taxes that once funded local administration, irrigation, and famine relief now flowed directly into company coffers. The consequences were immediate and devastating. Company agents squeezed revenue mercilessly, demanding fixed payments regardless of harvest conditions. Peasants sold livestock, land, and even their children to survive. Local officials, stripped of authority but still held responsible, resorted to corruption to protect themselves. The social fabric began to tear. Bengal, once prosperous, slid into chronic instability. Back in Britain, few cared as long as profits kept rising. The wealth extracted from India fueled Britain's industrial growth, financed wars in Europe, and enriched a new class of company men known as nabobs. These men returned home with fortunes so large they could buy estates, seats in parliament, and influence at the highest levels of government. India was no longer distant. It was reshaping Britain itself. But unchecked power breeds resistance. Elsewhere in India, regional rulers watched Bengal's fate with growing alarm. Some attempted to modernize their armies. Others sought alliances with rival European powers like France. One of the most formidable challengers emerged in southern India, the Kingdom of Mysore. Under Hyder Ali and later his son Tipu Sultan, Mysore became a serious threat to company ambitions. Tipu Sultan was no traditional ruler. He studied European military tactics, built rocket artillery more advanced than anything Britain had seen, and openly declared his hatred for company domination. To the British he was dangerous. To many Indians he was a symbol of resistance. The company responded the only way it knew how. Over a series of brutal conflicts known as the Anglo-Mysore Wars, the company threw its growing sepoy armies against Tipu's forces. Battles were fierce, shifting, and costly. At times the company came close to disaster. But it had one advantage no Indian ruler could match: access to global finance and endless reinforcements from Britain. When Tipu Sultan was finally killed in 1799 during the siege of Seringapatam, it sent a chilling message across India. Resistance was possible, but survival was not guaranteed. In western India, the Maratha Confederacy posed an even greater challenge. Unlike Bengal or Mysore, the Marathas were not a single state but a network of powerful warrior clans controlling vast territories. They had humiliated the Mughal Empire and stood as the dominant force in the subcontinent. Defeating them would require more than brute force. The company returned to its favorite weapon: division. Through treaties, subsidies, and manipulation, company officials played Maratha leaders against one another. Some accepted British protection in exchange for autonomy, not realizing protection meant dependency. Others resisted and were crushed in successive Anglo-Maratha wars. One by one, Maratha strongholds fell, not always to superior arms but to superior strategy and betrayal. By the early 19th century the pattern was clear. Indian rulers who cooperated lost independence slowly. Those who resisted lost it violently. The company's army grew into the largest private military force in the world, composed mostly of Indian soldiers commanded by British officers. These sepoys were disciplined, well-trained, and increasingly detached from traditional loyalties. The company had learned how to rule India using Indians themselves, a system both efficient and deeply unstable. Meanwhile, Britain's government began to grow uneasy. Reports of corruption, famine, and brutality leaked back to London. Parliamentary inquiries exposed staggering abuses. The idea that a private corporation wielded sovereign power over millions alarmed even hardened imperialists. Slowly, reluctantly, the British state began tightening its grip on the company. But by then the genie was out of the bottle. The East India Company had created a new reality. India was no longer a collection of kingdoms. It was an imperial possession in all but name. Railways, telegraphs, and new laws followed, not to empower Indians but to extract wealth and maintain control more efficiently. Yet beneath the surface, resentment was growing. Indian soldiers noticed unequal pay and racial discrimination. Religious practices were ignored or mocked. Traditional elites were sidelined. Farmers sank deeper into debt. The company believed it had mastered India. It had not. Because empires built on greed and arrogance always missed the warning signs. And in 1857, those warning signs would erupt into an explosion so violent it would shake British rule to its core, and force the Crown to finally take responsibility for the empire it had allowed a company to build. By the mid-19th century, the East India Company ruled more territory and people than many European kings. Yet for all its power, the company was standing on a fault line it refused to acknowledge. Beneath the appearance of order, parades of sepoys, neatly written revenue records and expanding railways, lay a deep and widening anger. Indians from every background had reasons to resent company rule, and those reasons were beginning to converge. For the peasantry, the company meant hunger. Land revenue systems like the permanent settlement locked farmers into crushing taxes regardless of harvests. Moneylenders thrived while villages collapsed. For artisans, British policies destroyed local industries, flooding markets with cheap machine-made textiles from Britain and reducing skilled craftsmen to poverty. For princes, the company's doctrine of lapse, annexed states whenever a ruler died without a male heir, erasing centuries-old dynasties with bureaucratic efficiency. And for the soldiers, the sepoys who formed the backbone of the company's army, the insult was personal. Sepoys were paid less than their British counterparts, denied promotion beyond certain ranks, and expected to serve overseas in ways that violated religious customs. The company dismissed their concerns as superstition. This arrogance would prove catastrophic. The spark came in 1857. The company introduced a new rifle, the Enfield, with cartridges rumored to be greased with cow and pig fat, offensive to both Hindu and Muslim soldiers. Whether the rumor was fully true mattered less than the response. Sepoy objections were ignored. When soldiers refused to use the cartridges, they were punished publicly and harshly. Discipline turned into humiliation. On May 10, 1857, in the town of Meerut, sepoys mutinied. They killed British officers, freed imprisoned comrades, and marched toward Delhi. What followed was not a single rebellion but a chain reaction. Across northern and central India, soldiers rose, peasants joined them, dispossessed princes reclaimed banners, and old grievances found violent expression. Delhi fell to the rebels who declared the aging Mughal Emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar, the symbolic leader of the uprising. For a moment history seemed to reverse itself. The company, stunned and outnumbered, faced the very real possibility of collapse. Britain responded with fury. Reinforcements poured in. The rebellion was crushed with ruthless efficiency. Cities were shelled, villages burned, and mass executions carried out. Reprisals were brutal and indiscriminate. By 1858 the uprising was over, but the illusion that a company could rule an empire was shattered forever. The British government stepped in. The East India Company was dissolved. Its armies, territories, and administration were transferred directly to the British Crown. Queen Victoria was proclaimed Empress of India. What had begun as a merchant gamble had become a formal empire. Yet the conquest of India had come at a cost. Britain had gained wealth and power beyond measure, but it had also inherited a land deeply scarred by exploitation. The systems built to extract profit now had to sustain governance. Railways and canals expanded, education systems were reshaped and laws standardized, but always with British interests at the center. India was ruled but not reconciled. National consciousness began to stir. Educated elites questioned foreign rule. Newspapers spread ideas of self-determination. The memory of company greed and rebellion lingered like an open wound. Britain believed it had secured its greatest imperial prize. In truth, it had only delayed the inevitable. Because the same gamble that allowed Britain to conquer India, arrogance, exploitation, and faith in permanent control, would one day fuel the movement that brought the empire down. And that is the final irony of this story. Britain did not conquer India because it was stronger. It conquered India because it was willing to gamble everything on a company. And history would make sure the bill was paid. Empires are often remembered for their flags and victories, but rarely for the risks that made them possible. Britain's conquest of India was not a master plan carved in stone, it was a reckless gamble by merchants who never expected to rule, and a government that looked away as profit turned into power. That gamble reshaped India, enriched Britain, and changed the modern world forever. But it also planted the seeds of resistance, nationalism, and the eventual collapse of empire. History doesn't just reward ambition, it keeps the receipt. If you want more deep, unfiltered stories of how power is really built and lost, this is NationScope. And this is only the beginning.